Hello, my name is Laleh Khalili, and I am very sorry that I can't be with you today. But what I want to do today is to speak a little bit about Palestine, the Red Sea, and the maritime flow of capital. I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you have at the end if you send them to me by email at l.khalili@exeter.ac.uk. I'm now going to start sharing a PowerPoint because why not? And then I'll be speaking to you about the subject of interest. So allow me to share. And I hope that you can see this screen now. Okay, so to start with, some basics about the global trade. About 80 to 90% of global trade is carried aboard cargo ships, and that's quite a significant amount. It is, well, I mean, it's probably the most of any other form of transport. And much of that transportation is actually international. So, although the US is a very significant force in global trade, its coastal shipping is not, coast to coast shipping is not as big as you would imagine it to be by maritime trade. The EU-China trade is in 2022, quite a huge one, and it's about nearly €1 trillion. And the reason that this is significant is because, of course, the EU-China trade goes through the Suez Canal. And 40% of global maritime trade by tonnage is fossil fuels, coal, gas, and oil. And that, again, is significant to our discussion today. Another word that we're going to be using quite extensively in today's talk is the word choke points, which are nodes along trade routes, whether on land or on sea, where there's constraints on or concentration of mobile goods. And so for that reason, it becomes much more possible to actually stop the movement of goods because of that concentration. It becomes quite a significant point. I'll be talking about this in the at the very end of the talk. Now, the global choke points that you see are very significant places. And this is essentially the numbering given to them is not by the volume that goes through them, but rather by location from west to east. And that those include the Panama Canal, the Strait of Gibraltar, the Cape of Good Hope around Africa, but the Bosphorus Strait, which connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, Suez Canal, of course, which is the point of discussion today, the Bab el-Mandab, which connects the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, which sits atop or connects the Persian or Arabian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and finally the Straits of Malacca in South China Sea, which is actually probably the most significant because about 30% of global trade goes through the Strait of Malacca. But what is important is that the two most important nodes of trade or choke points for oil are the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab. Now, about 12% of global trade is handled by Suez Canal annually. And that means that this amount of cargo also goes, this amount plus this amount of cargo also goes through Bab el-Mandab. If we go back to the screen before, Bab el-Mandab is number 6 on that screen. If you can see, it's at the edge of the Arabian Peninsula. I'll be talking about this a little bit more later. And about 18,000 ships pass through the channel each year. So it's really quite a significant node of transport in the world. Now, Bab el-Mandab is similarly significant, and it is significant. And Bab el-Mandab sits between Somaliland, Djibouti on the African side, and Yemen on the Asian side. The reason that it is very significant is because about 5% of world's oil go through the Bab el-Mandab. This number is from 2016, but that has largely stayed the same. And it is significant because there is some of this oil that goes through Bab el-Mandab will end up going to the Suez Canal, and some of it will go to the Suez Mediterranean pipeline, and some of it will actually go to the port of Eilat, as I will discuss a little bit in Israel. Now, I think it's really important for this discussion for us to also talk about a little bit about Israel's energy and transportation features. I'm assuming that this audience knows quite a lot about the history of Israel and Palestine. Israel is a settler colonial state that was established by various different imperial sponsors, the British first, the French very briefly in the 1950s, and of course, since the 1960s, the United States on the coast of Mediterranean. And it has famously been called the largest, most unsinkable aircraft carrier, strategic aircraft carrier for the United States. It serves as a kind of a regional gendarme. It ensures that demands for sovereignty over natural resources in the popular demands for sovereignty over natural resources in the region are kept in check. And it also acts as a kind of a laboratory for various forms of experimentation, development of weaponry, and of course, surveillance. In Israel itself, about 80% of Israeli energy needs come from gas that come from offshore Mediterranean fields. Around 12% of its energy needs comes from coal, which is transported there from Australia, Brazil, and India, and the rest comes from oil or renewables. Now, there's also as you can see on that map, there's a really massive gas field, natural gas field, right next to Gaza, and very close in, and therefore really quite easy to develop. But it has prevented the development of that marine gas field for obvious reasons, because Palestinians would have access to the resources that that field provides. Israel also has 3 or 4 main ports. The most significant one is the port of Haifa, where Adani, the Indian cronies of Modi, control the container terminal. But Haifa itself also additionally receives bulk transportation that comes in bulk ships like grain or coal or ores. And it also has a refinery, albeit quite an old and decrepit refinery, but one that can be used for producing refined products. The other 2 ports are Ashdod, which is a little close to Ashkelon, and it also is a container port. The port of Ashkelon, which is the mainly used for export of oil, and the port of Eilat, which sits, as you can see, atop the Gulf of Aqaba, and it is accessible really either through the Suez Canal. Essentially, it's accessible through the Red Sea, and Eilat is quite significant because it is the main port, or continues to be, although its financial circumstances are quite dodgy. It is and has been the main port for cars and wheeled vehicles, but also the starting point, the entry terminus for the oil that is transported via pipeline from Eilat to Ashkelon and shipped to Europe from there. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me go on ahead and begin by talking about what the Houthis have done. Houthis are a group of a religious minoritarian group in northern Yemen who until the 1960s controlled actually the northern Yemen's regime. It controlled the reins of power there, and they have since the Arab uprisings of 2011 have struggled to overthrow the Saudi-supported government there and control all of Yemen itself. On 19th of November 2023, a few weeks after the Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza began, A helicopter that was operated by the Houthi-controlled Yemeni Navy hovered over a car carrier, roll-on, they're called roll-on, roll-off vehicle carriers, called Galaxy Leader, which was going through the Red Sea, and it was just southwest of the port of Jeddah. You can actually see that image is one that the Houthis released of the helicopter approaching the ship. Masked and armed military men rappelled down to the deck, raised Yemeni and Palestinian flags, and directed the ship to the port of Hodeidah, further south along the Red Sea. Now, since Galaxy Leader was birthed in the 2 years, in a year and a few months, that it was birthed at the port of Hodeidah, it actually ended up becoming a kind of a selfie hotspot. It was featured in TikTok videos, and it became a wedding venue of a sort. The ship's crew, most of whom were from the Philippines or Eastern Europe, were held in Yemen until January 2025, when the ceasefire went into effect, at which point they left Yemen for their home nations. By that point, 19th of November, we were 6 weeks into Israel's siege and slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. And in that point, nearly 13,000 Palestinians lay dead in the rubble. That number is now approximates 100,000 that we know from direct military action. Despite brazen exhortations to genocide by members of the Israel's cabinet, including Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's order to shut off life-sustaining infrastructures in Gaza, of course, European and North American leaders have been largely continued to support the Israel genocide. They occasionally make a couple of peeps, make noise, but they really haven't done anything substantive. And in fact, Britain and the US have been actively explicit in the sort of in supporting Israel's genocide. Amidst this geopolitical grotesquerie, the Houthis, who control the capital Sana'a and the most populous parts of Yemen, enacted a blockade in the Red Sea against vessels linked with Israel. In the immediate aftermath of Galaxy Leader's arrest, Israel claimed that the vessel was, and I quote, British-owned and Japanese-operated, conveniently eliding that the shipping company, Japanese Nippon Yusen, which is known as NYK, if you're ever at a port, you'll see big ships that say NYK on the side of them, charters, or a Ray car carrier charters the ship, and a Ray car carrier, which is registered in the Isle of Man, owns a fleet of 65 roll-on vehicles, and is owned by Israeli billionaire Rami Ungar. Rami Ungar is one of Israel's biggest automobile importers, one of its largest shipping magnates, and is known as a friend of various Israeli politicians, including Ehud Olmert and Yoav Gallant, the chief of military who called for the starvation of Gaza in October 2023. And Ungar and Gallant were treated by Ungar to the 2018 World Cup in Russia. So this kind of the flags of convenience, which are usually used as a mode of controlling workers, are often used also to shade or to cloak the ownership structures that could potentially be a source or a magnet for protest. In the weeks that followed, 13 of 29 ships targeted by swarms of drones or missiles operated by the Yemeni naval forces suffered a direct hit. And this is from a BBC report in, I think, February or March of 2024. And then although some of the ships were hobbled, no crew members suffered injuries. And then a Houthi rebel actually at some point, a Houthi leader invited vessels sailing through the Red Sea to add a tag to their automatic identification system. It's an electronic tag that allows for other ships and anybody actually who has access to this to see what the ship is, what kind of a ship it is, and what flag it flies under. And it invited them to add a tag to their automatic identification system, declaring that their ships have no link with Israel. A very large number of ships did that. The ships that didn't do that, Lloyd's List reported that about 60 ships actually instead added armed guards on board, whereas vessels operated by the Chinese shipping companies OOCL and COSCO began disavowing Israel and loads of other ships in their identifier. So they would have their identifier and then they would say not touching Israel. Soon after the first attack, and I think this is quite significant, maritime insurance companies began increasing the war risk premium on all of the vessels traversing the Red Sea. The war risk premium is an additional clause added to the insurance that ships have to carry for their cargo, which accounts for, which pays for potentially being hit by militaries. The cost of insurance for a $100 million cargo ship increased from $10,000 to $1 million in the space of a few weeks. The volume of cargo also passing through the Red Sea and onto the Suez Canal dropped by some estimates by about 45% at the height of the Houthi blockades. And for container ships, which often tend to be very much larger, it dropped by 60%, with almost half of the ships on the Asia-Europe route choosing to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. This precipitous drop of traffic through the Suez Canal hit Egypt particularly hard, since the country is dependent on canal fees for a steady supply of foreign currency. Just-in-time manufacturing schedules in Europe and Asia were also disturbed, as the longer journey around the African continent adds anywhere between 10 and 20 days to the supply chain circuits between the two continents. Now, if we go back to the map of Israel, if you can look on the screen and see at the very bottom of Israel, at the bottom of the dagger shape of Israel, there's the port of Eilat. The port of Eilat has been the most directly affected by this blockade, sitting as it does at the top of one of the two northern arms of the Red Sea. With the Houthi attacks, the port's operating company declared bankruptcy in 2024. Eilat is, after Haifa and Ashdod, the third largest port in Israel. And it is the primary port in the country for automobile imports and one of the terminuses of the Eilat-Ashkelon oil pipeline, which receives petroleum very frequently now from the United Arab Emirates. This oil supplies Israeli refineries at Haifa and Ashdod, and the excess of it is exported via the Mediterranean port of Ashkelon to European buyers. About 70% of Israel's energy needs, 70 to 80%, are met by its natural gas and the rest by coal. And Antipodean coal and livestock cargoes were also affected. The coal and livestock that was coming from Australia were also affected by this Houthi blockade. The most significant ramification of the Houthi action on Israel, however, was political. A few weeks after the first Houthi attack, possibly inspired by the Houthis, the government of Malaysia directed the ports operators in the country to ban ships en route to Israel or owned by Zim from refueling in Malaysia. That's quite significant because Singapore is one of the busiest ports in the world, and so a lot of ships usually go to Malaysia as an alternative port for refueling. And that ban was quite significant, quite important. Now, Zim is quite an important shipping company to know. It was originally founded in 1945 by the Jewish Agency being sort of the pre-state body that took on the job of state formation in Palestine for Israel. And the Jewish Agency established Zim as a kind of a national shipping company. It was later, about 20 years after, it was privatized and is now owned by Ofer brothers, who are very closely tied to successive regimes in Israel. Zim is currently the ninth largest container cargo company in the world, and therefore it is really quite a significant operator in maintaining or in defying the blockade against Israel by ensuring that cargo is transported there. Interestingly, also, of course, Ofer Brothers have registered their own company in Singapore, from what I understand, and most of their ships fly the flags of convenience of the more lightly regulated flags of places like Bahamas and Panama. Now, one of the things that is also significant about Zim is that it is, throughout its history, whether it was state-owned or privatized, it has functioned as a kind of an arm of the state, and it is known to have provided cover for and collaborated with Mossad in its various operations, including the Operation Cherbourg, which I encourage you guys to look up, which is essentially a hijacking of ships from France, as well as the kidnapping of Mordechai Vanunu to Israel. Mordechai Vanunu was was the person who leaked who was the whistleblower for the Israeli nuclear program. So Malaysia's action and Chinese vessels' AIS disavowals of Israel were seen as strategic victories for Houthis in trying to politically isolate Israel. Predictably, of course, the Biden administration could not countenance Israel's isolation. And in December 2024, with some fanfare and a great deal of dissembling about its membership, announced a sort of a coalition called Operation Prosperity Guardian, which was supposedly a naval exercise intended to protect shipping through the Red Sea. It's interesting here because I've seen people debate on Twitter about whether or not the operations that the US launches is in order to support Israel or support sort of the flow of capital. And for me, that seems a kind of a non-question, in part because supporting Israel is about supporting capitalism. And the Palestinian struggle at the moment is a national anti-colonial struggle, but one which is, I think, quite significant to recognize, has repercussions for the shape that global capitalism with the US as its imperial metropole takes in the world. Now, what was really interesting about this Operation Prosperity Guardian was that it was supposed to be this incredible sort of multiple ships, multiple US ships in there. And the US announced a number of different countries. But about couple of days after Biden's announcement, in fact, Spain, Italy, and France all declared that while they would continue to have the naval vessels that they had in order to protect the cargoes of, Spanish, Italian, and French ships, they were not going to be actually placing their forces under U.S. command. And the U.S. also claimed that there were 8 different states operating as part of Prosperity Guardian, but which did not want anyone to know. They did not want their names to be released, which actually then defies the whole point of Operation Prosperity Guardian, because in fact, it seems to me like primarily a US kind of force with lots of different states not wanting anything to do with it, in part because it actually is a political liability, I think, to support Israel. When Trump came to power, about a month or so after he took office, a little bit over a month after he took office, he started Operation Rough Rider, which actually was entirely under the command of the US. And it entailed an aircraft carrier, strike groups, B-2 bombers, and advanced missiles are actually going out to the Red Sea and targeting over 800 locations in Yemen, including some whose coordinates were posted online by random armchair open source intelligence people that in fact actually caused the death of some 70 or 80 civilians. What was also interesting was that although the Houthis have nothing like the kind of resources of the United States, they shot down several MQ-9 Reaper drones at the cost of $30 million each. 3 aircraft carriers, 3 F-18 Super Hornets either fell off or caught fire on the aircraft carrier. Each of those cost $67 million. And the New York Times reported reported that the U.S. forces also nearly lost several other F-16s and possibly even an F-35 that a missile that the Houthis had fired a missile at, and had spent $1 billion worth of ammunition fired at Yemen, and then within less than 2 months, the U.S. Under Trump declared victory and moved on. Now, what does this tell us about the forms of struggle that we see against U.S. Violence and of course, its Israeli subsidiary violence in the region? Israel was also involved in the process of bombing, and there's like a really interesting history back here, which I really like to talk about for a moment because it shows the extent to which Israel functions as a gendarme and has done so. Back when the Houthis had an imam or a leader in control of northern Yemen up until the 1960s, there was a free officer Arab nationalist revolt against the Zaydi imam there. And the Saudis actually came to the support of the Zaydis. And because the Saudis did not have the necessary wherewithal, the Israeli military, the Israeli Air Force, actually dropped bombs on the revolutionary forces in Yemen. So this is in the 1960s. In the end, the revolutionary forces deposed the Zaydis, but the Zaydis have risen again, and their political positions have shifted. This is quite significant because it says something also about the way that the struggle against Israeli sort of depredation and violence in the region is not solely about them repressing Palestinians, about their settler colonial expulsion of Palestinians and the commission of genocide against them, but about the imposition of a larger imperial system on the region. And so what we see is multiple layers and locales for forms of resistance against Israel. Of course, the Palestinians have a large number of kind of global connections in terms of in terms of their locale at the center of these forms of struggle. The most obvious one is that it is, of course, used as a laboratory for arms surveillance and repression methods. So what Israel does in Palestine often travels elsewhere, usually via imperial US conduits. But Palestine has also, from the very start, acted as a node of resistance and solidarity. All the global third worldist left, from Che Guevara to Amilcar Cabral to the ANC to the South African Communist Party, always declared their solidarities with Palestinians. So I think that it's really important to acknowledge that the Palestinian struggle is not only about a struggle for Palestine, but it is about a larger struggle for solidarities, building solidarities in the world and against the kind of fascist opposition, the fascist forms of international networking. In terms of pushback, there are also state pushbacks, whether via arms, as we see as in Yemen, or boycotts, as we see in Malaysia, both state boycott and popular boycott in Malaysia, or via international law, as in South Africa. And then there's popular forms of mobilization. And this is where the lovely folks that asked me to talk about this subject asked me to write about. Popular forms of resistance, of course, in here in the global north, can take a whole lot of different forms and shapes. And I will give you some examples of the kinds of organizing that is happening around this to offer some possible avenues of thinking about what might work. First, it is the question of direct action. Here in the UK, where I am, Palestine Action is a direct action group that puts its bodies in great danger by essentially breaking into arms manufacturing places and trying to damage arms manufacturers which produce parts for Israeli weaponry, including Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli company that has a major headquarter here. But one of the other things that Palestine Action does is also engage in more symbolic action, throwing paint, for example, at insurance companies and banks that support the production of these arms. The great many folks that are engaged with Palestine Action have been imprisoned, and some have had terror charges brought against them, and they are struggling against these spurious charges that are being used to stifle their right to protest. The second group of and forms of mobilizing are the more familiar forms of union organizing. And there's some interesting kinds of tensions here, because as you probably know, there are not all unions are created equal. Some unions are far more radical than others. Some unions are far more accountable to their rank and file than they are elsewhere. As you know, for example, AFL-CIO has a long history of having worked as an adjunct of the CIA, somewhere in the sometimes in Latin America. As you know, the Teamsters, for example, have declared their support for various kinds of Trumpian policies. And what has been interesting is that even with Port Workers Union, which in most countries are some of the most radical unions for a whole variety of historic reasons, there is also divisions. So the Port Workers Unions, for example, in South Africa, or Genoa in Italy, or Barcelona, tend to be incredibly radical and have been very active in solidarity work, for example, in refusing to load or unload ships that were going to Israel, and in the case of Genoa, carrying arms to Saudi Arabia. But then there are also port workers unions that are absolutely embedded in the larger regimes of power. And I think this is really important to recognize, is that there are histories of racism and colonial complicity in some of these larger unions, which I think have to be reckoned with before the unions can be fully incorporated into that. So while, for example, the port workers unions on the west coast of the US have a long history of anti-racist organizing, and therefore they have been also at the forefront of many of the US unions in supporting Palestinian causes. On the east coast, the port workers unions have actually been completely complicit, and even when there was quite a successful port workers strike in the east coast ports, the port workers unions declared that they will continue to service Israeli ships going through there. Which brings us to the next point, which is that there needs to be a job of research and education. And this education happens not only through political education and political mobilization, but also through talking to and constantly interacting with the rank and file in the kinds of larger unions that could potentially have a position. At the forefront of this in Europe in particular is Palestine Youth Movement, which organizes with and Palestine solidarity organizations of various sorts, which do a lot of research and a lot of political organization. And we're seeing increasingly this spreading. And I see this as being one of the most important tasks, in part because also a lot of the businesses that could potentially act as sites of counter-logistical protests are sites that are often quite opaque. And I think what we need is political, technical education in how these things function. The next process is boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which organizing around them in communities, municipalities, universities, and workplaces are enormously important. Even small wins matter. Only yesterday, King's College, Cambridge, which is one of the larger colleges of Cambridge, actually voted to divest from fuel companies and arms companies that, and therefore to actually have quite a radical position. And with this, there can be a lot of coalition building, because of course oil companies, and in the case of the US, probably hedge funds and mega billionaire donors could be, as we have seen, have been incredibly detrimental to the job of organizing in a lot of communities and a lot of organizations and in universities. And so boycott, divestment, sanctions has to look to coalition building in all of these spaces. And then there are a number of examples that we see currently, which is about the unions also working alongside direct action folks, also working alongside communities. An example of this was the Stop the Boat movement in California in both 2014 and 2020, where in 2014, when the Zim ships were carrying used weapons from Israel to be distributed to police forces in the United States in the wake of the Ferguson revolt, that we saw the Black Lives and African American radical activists organizing alongside Palestinian activists, organizing alongside unions to stop the Zim ships from being unloaded in the East Coast ports. Today we have unmasked Maersk, which has actually got it has got its start, I believe, in New York, New Jersey, and again has Palestine Youth Movement involved with it. In the UK, we have Workers for Palestine, which is a community organizations that are doing the job of organizing and mobilizing, particularly trying to mobilize rank and file in arms industries. And then there's No Harbor for Genocide, which tries to do community organizing in ports and is particularly interested in sort of the shipments of fuel, jet fuel, that is going to Israel, often from US ports. And what, of course, there's this process of mobilizing requires constant modification, in part because, for example, because of these kinds of port worker actions, when the US sends fuel to Israel, it does so when the commercial ships that are carrying fuel, they don't actually stop at commercial ports. They go to the US naval bases in different places. And so there has to be new modalities of organizing that recognizes, that acknowledges these innovations that the other side are also taking up. Finally, legal support is really important. Zionist lawfare, as we have seen, kind of specious and spurious legal cases that have been brought against various folks, end up being really quite important. And so there is actually quite a need for that form of mobilizing as well. I hope this has answered some of the questions here. I'm quite happy to provide the PowerPoint that I have shown with any information that you need in it. And as I said, if you want to ask me any questions, please do feel free to send me your questions to l.khalili@exeter.ac.uk. Thank you and solidarity.
Materials that are being used to kill Palestinians in Gaza, some of them come from, the Congo, right? The rare earth metals that are required in the tech, the steel that's required to build the weapon, each individual part. The one industry that is still active in the United States is the weapons industry. So a lot of it comes through the factories here in our lovely country. And this year, Palestinian Youth Movement, SALAM, and many other organizations, including TSA, have launched campaigns targeting these choke points. I think that's pretty significant in the long durée of the Palestinian struggle. I think it's like a level of focus on something that I haven't seen before. Like, what would be? I mean, BDS is like probably the biggest civil society movement targeting the occupation, but thinking through supply chains and choke points and labor and the fact that the entire global south is in unlike the entire West, is actually has a lot of sympathy for the most glaring case of colonialism alive today.
Hi everyone, can you guys all hear me? Okay, awesome. I'm Ibtihal, I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and I'm going to be talking about the Maersk campaign that's kind of been mentioned a couple of times so far. I just kind of like quickly, like with a quick show of hands, who here has heard of the Maersk campaign? Okay, awesome. So that's really good to see. I wanted to first jump a bit into the logic behind the campaign, and I'm sure once the Laleh's video comes up, actually a lot of this will like make a lot of sense, and she'll probably explain it a lot better than I can. And essentially the demand for a people's arms embargo and what that means for us and the movement at large, before jumping into some of the more tangible research findings that this campaign has uncovered, and some of the more tangible wins that this campaign has had on an international scale. So I first kind of wanted to talk about, what is a people's arms embargo? We're nearing 20 or like over 20 months at this point into the genocide, and the Palestinian Solidarity Movement it's become clear that we must commit to a clear and unequivocal demand to end all US and Western aid, arms, and diplomatic cover to the Zionist entity, and fight relentlessly until it's secure. And so now is the time for recommitment to bring, all of our friends, our family, our comrades, and coworkers into the long-term struggle, because we owe it to the people of Gaza and Palestine. So specifically with the campaign that we're waging against Maersk, Maersk is a logistics company that has facilitated the shipping of weapons and weapons components to the Zionist entity that has made the genocide of the Palestinian people possible. And Maersk is involved in all aspects of the supply chain of death. And so, this campaign is a refusal to allow these companies to go unnoticed while they fuel the massacres of our people. And we've all seen that a ceasefire without an arms embargo is just more genocide, and a ceasefire without an arms embargo is not a true ceasefire, because with the tools to continue this genocide in its hands, Israel will continue to massacre the Palestinian people, and it will continue to stockpile weapons and military cargo to continue the genocide, regardless of if there's a ceasefire or not. And then also, I wanted to uplift a statement that was put out by the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions in Gaza in September of 2024, that specifically asked labor unions to refuse to deal with military shipments to Israel through all military ships and logistics companies, and it named both Maersk and Zim in this statement. And so kind of the political moment that we're in and what drew us to this campaign is knowing that, while we know that Israel is carrying out this genocide that's funded as really by the governments of the West, the unprecedented scale of mass murder that we're witnessing, is this better? The unprecedented scale of mass murder we're witnessing in Gaza today would not be possible without the corporations that are providing the weapons and making profit off of the massacres of our people. So this includes tanks, fighter jets, and military vehicles that are made in the United States and then sent to Israel to execute this genocide. And logistics companies are the key to this expanding arms trade. They facilitate the transportation of the over $19 billion in military funding that the United States has dedicated to power Israel's genocide in just this year. And we understand that logistics companies function as an essential part of the weapons industry supply chain that imperialism relies on. They've historically and remain today a key strategic element of any war effort. Imperialism is not just a theory, it's a tangible material reality for our people across the globe. So I just kind of wanted to briefly touch on the historical role of logistics as the key artery of imperialism. There's so much posters of like World War II era posters that show language of like, guard the supply chains, tanks don't fight in factories. And all of this language around, guarding supply chain and factories, whatnot, it's not a coincidence that the infrastructure of logistics are also some of the most potent symbols of empire. So for example, the British Empire's key maritime routes, along which the cables for the telegraph were laid, which later became phone lines, also allowed for the creation of world markets because of the quick transmission of prices that made it possible to telegraph messages. So the corporate logistics sector, in which Maersk is one of the most important key players, exists as an afterlife, an outgrowth of the technologies of empire and capitalism that we've seen these countries being built on. So that's kind of a very, very rough, brief kind of intro that I'm sure Data will probably get touch into a lot better. But kind of, it brings us to this next question of how is Maersk complicit in the genocide of our people? So for starters, Maersk guarantees the prompt and consistent supply of materials to create massacres and destruction in Gaza, and it's involved in all aspects of the supply chain. It's involved from like bringing military cargo to arms companies for assembly, shipping cargo to Israel from the US, and then essentially using the shipments of military cargo and weapons that it receives. Maersk carries parts of weapons to arms manufacturers in the United States in order for these companies to assemble the weapons that are murdering their people. So to get like a specific example, the wings and aircraft structures of Lockheed Martin's fighter jets are shipped on Maersk lines. Maersk picks up these parts of F-35 jets from Israel Aerospace Industries in occupied Palestine and takes them to Lockheed Martin Aeronautics in Fort Worth, Texas, where these jets are assembled and sent back to our region to target bomb Gaza and Lebanon. Maersk also carries military cargo from the US to Israel, so it's not just inbound cargo to arms manufacturers. And in a report that we released back in November. From September 2023 to September 2024, Maersk shipped millions of pounds of military goods across 2,000 shipments from the United States to the Israeli military, which included hulls, engines, specialized parts for armored personnel carriers, tactical vehicles, and aircraft and projectile systems. And our research shows that Maersk has been carrying everything from tactical vehicles to parts for armored tanks and aircraft and artillery systems to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Another example, in late October of 2024, footage emerged from Gaza showing Palestinian men blindfolded and crammed into the back of an Israeli military truck, identified as an Oshkosh M1085 tactical vehicle. These vehicles are manufactured here in the United States and transported to Israel via Maersk. And at least 104 Oshkosh medium tactical vehicles were sent on Maersk ships to the Israeli Ministry of Defense since the beginning of the war on Gaza. The Israeli Ministry of Defense also puts rocket launchers on these tactical vehicles that we know Maersk is shipping, and they launch missiles at Palestinian homes, schools, and refugee camps. So that's just one example, and there's so many more that we've discovered in this initial research report. And then also I kind of wanted to mention that these shipments directly correspond to military sales between the United States and Israel. According to our research, much of the cargo that Maersk is shipping to the Israeli Ministry of Defense remains unreported. So according to our research, almost 35% of this cargo is unmarked, which should be highly suspicious to anyone looking at this data, because then it leads up to the question, what is Maersk trying to hide? And so essentially, without Maersk, this military cargo would not be able to reach Israel. Logistics companies are essentially the invisible profiteers of death and weapons manufacturers, which makes the genocide a reality. And so thus targeting Maersk directly disrupts the flow of military goods in the supply chain that's used to continue this genocide. And so our two demands kind of on this campaign are to stop the transportation of military cargo complicit in the genocide of the Palestinian people, and to terminate all contracts that support war and genocide. And those are our two demands of Maersk. And then kind of in this next like section, I want to briefly run out of time, so I'll be very quick. There's like 5 research reports that we kind of put out, and I kind of wanted to just like give a quick overview of some of these research findings, because I think it's important for us when we think about, why are we waging campaigns against like the supply chain, or like logistics and shipping companies. In November, the Mask Off Maersk campaign released a research report that was essentially the one that I mentioned previously about from September 2023 to 2024, more than 2,100 shipments carrying military cargo were carried on Maersk commercial ships to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And over 900 of these shipments passed through Spain's Al Jazeera port on their way to Israel, defying Spain's commitment to not allow military cargo just into Israel, which was announced in May of 2024. Does anybody remember when that happened? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, Maersk ships now, if they're on their way to Israel, actually cannot dock in the port of Al Jazeera because Spain is upholding the decision, or like their initial arms embargo commitment. And there's also like been some more recent updates about sorry, it's a little bit scattered. But there was also some more recent updates in Spain where the Spanish government ordered the immediate termination of a $7.5 million contract to buy ammunition from a company with direct ties to Israeli arms maker Elbit Systems. And this was like on the 24th of April. And so, this is against the backdrop of revelations from the Maersk investigative research, which discovered that private companies like Maersk were violating the Spanish government's arms embargo with Israel. And so that was kind of the first initial report that we put out. And then in December, we put out a report that basically followed it was a report on ammunitions that were being sent to Israel specifically through the MV Sagamore container ship that transferred approximately 1,200 tons, which is 1.2 million pounds of ammunition and other military supplies from the U.S. Department of Defense to the port of Ashdod in Israel. Basically, again, like the U.S. Department of Defense continued to violate Spanish law by sending military cargo to Israel via Spanish waters. So that was the second report, and then we put out in January a report about Maersk's coordination of shipments from settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Syrian Golan Heights, as evidenced by bills of lading listing settlement addresses. And so basically, Maersk is helping export goods for businesses based in illegal settlements, such as Israel Aerospace Industries, GNT Industries, Offertex Industries, and so many more. And many of these companies are actually listed in the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights database for their role in supporting settlement growth, which is considered a violation of international law. And also all of these reports are public on masswealthmaersk.com/reports. I highly encourage everyone to, actually look at the research that's being put out. That's super helpful for actually understanding the role that these companies are playing. And specifically with this research report, the investigation showed that Maersk didn't merely passively transport goods, but actively coordinated shipments from illegal settlements, thereby contributing to the establishment and expansion of settlement economies and infrastructure. And then recently, I don't know if people are following what's going on in the UK, but there's actually been a lot of movement with regards to the campaign and what's going on in Parliament with them. But there was a report basically released that since the beginning of the genocide, the UK has sent thousands of military goods to Israel, including 150,000 bullets and further 9,000 munition of war items, which could include bombs and missiles. And many of these items were sent after the suspension of around 30 arms licenses by the Labour government in September of 2024. And essentially, like our evidence suggests that the UK is sending F-35 parts directly to Israel despite these suspensions, and that the UK government has been lying to the public. But again, like, is that anything new? But yeah, basically, this report revealed that this was categorically untrue and that they have been lying. And then in May, this one maybe I think people may have heard a lot about it. It was making a lot of it made a lot of international news and local news about F-35 supply chain that's kind of directly in our backyard, specifically like in New Jersey. But essentially, since at least March of 2022, Maersk has shipped the wings for every Israeli F-35 delivered, including wings for 5 more Israeli F-35 scheduled for delivery by 2028. And Maersk has been involved in transporting these Israeli F-35 components since 2018. And essentially, this report reveals that companies like Maersk play a crucial role in the transportation of F-35 components and related equipment across international borders. And it's also solely responsible for transporting the components essential to the critical functions of the F-35, which was kind of the main shipment that was leaving. Again, like just specifically like on this specific, we're talking specifically about the F-35 supply chain. Nearly all maritime shipments of the F-35 components to Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman have been transported by Maersk, which is insane. And it's important because without these shipments, the F-35 wouldn't have the ability to store fuel or power its flight control systems, refuel mid-flight, open the gun door, load bombs or drop bombs. Essentially, like their indispensability to the weapons manufacturing supply chain that supports the Israeli military. So yeah, that's kind of a very, very, very brief overview on kind of the reports that we put out and the research that this campaign has uncovered. And then also in terms of like international campaign updates and developments, I mean, we've seen a lot move specifically in Morocco and Spain, specifically with this last shipment of F-35s back in April. Port workers at the Tangier port in Morocco refused to operate machinery to service the Maersk ship complicit in the transportation of F-35 parts to Israel. And it was actually refused by the vast majority of remote crane controllers on both ships to work that ship. So that was huge. I mean, three trade unions putting out statements essentially telling their people not to touch cargo on a ship is huge, especially in some of these cities where there's also non-unionized workers that are also refusing to touch the cargo. And then also in France, actually with the same F-35 supply chain that I've been talking about, in April, local dock workers of the CGT union in France refused to handle the Nexo Maersk, which was carrying surface analyzers for the F-35 at the port of Marseille. And in return, Maersk had to remove an entire port call from one of their regular Mediterranean service lines. So similar to how the port of Algeciras no longer services Maersk ships on their way to Israel, this port in France also no longer services Maersk ships on their way to Israel, which is very huge. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'll stop there just because I don't want to take up too much time. I think I went a little bit over. But if you have any questions or want to get more involved or like want to just like plug in whatnot, I'm empty hand. You can find me, and I would love to chat.
Yeah, we might do some loud sounds.
Yeah.
So while Aaron or Zach sets up the PowerPoint for the next thing, just to get it up on the screen, I was thinking we can, while it's fresh in everybody's minds, just 2 questions. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. I have a couple of questions, but.
And if I don't know the answer to your question, I will get back to you, I promise.
So raise your hand if you're feeling it.
Do you know more about like port and
The port and forward?
yeah.
Like, what about it?
I guess I don't know. I was wondering, like, if they're unionized or basically anything that I'm actually going to that area soon.
And the
Yeah,
port.
a lot of my family lives there, so I'm hoping.
I mean, I do know that for the F-35 supply chain, it starts in Houston, it starts in Texas. I don't know the conditions of like union, not unionized, like the workers there, but I can contact people I know there, like the Miami Houston is probably has a much better read of work and unions there. But like I can take your number and we can chat after.
They're ILA, so it's there's 2 port worker unions. One is on the west coast, one is on the east coast and south, and the ILA is the more conservative. And they are the ones who went on strike in the fall, and they specifically during their strike said they would continue to keep moving military cargo. So it's very difficult to get through to the union because it's very sensitive. I mean, it should be,
It's the
yeah,
same.
south.
I mean, it's the same island as like the New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like the
So-
same hostility towards.
They're conservative, but. Efforts are concentrated in the Mediterranean, that's obviously where Israel is. I was wondering, like, what about Southeast Asia or like the Panama Canal, Straits of Magellan, places like that? Is there any interest or traction in those areas of the world?
I don't know, to be honest, but I can definitely ask our research team.
I think we're getting close to having the SALAM that's looking good.
Wait, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, go. I was saying they would probably be better to answer the question.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. That was really nice.
Hi everyone, how are you doing? My name is Sami. Full disclosure, I wasn't supposed to be doing this panel, so please forgive me for any shortcomings. I was brought in like a few days ago. I'm gonna start with a chant because this is material. Everything's a rally to me. From Kashmir to Palestine. I need more energy. From Kashmir to Palestine. Occupation is a crime.
Occupation is a crime.
Kashmir to Palestine.
Kashmir to Palestine.
Occupation is a crime.
Occupation is a crime.
The capitalists are nothing without their capital. Nothing. What we're going to learn today, and what Laleh gets into with our lecture, is really this is a game of logistics, of canals, of arteries that can be stopped, interrupted, and destroyed. Right? So I first want to get into an introduction of SALAM. Go to the next slide. SALAM is a South Asian political organization that draws on the tradition of revolutionary Marxism, and we're based in New York City. We are striving to co-articulate a pan-South Asian socialist and anti-caste politics that engages with ongoing struggles in the region through our work with progressive organizations here and also in South Asia and beyond. And primarily, what's important about us is that we are internationalists because we understand imperialism as an international force, right? And what's really important when we look at logistics, when we look at canals, when we talk about these things, is that we can really use logistics to visibilize the connections between imperialist entities, between the sort of entities supporting genocide, and the scaffolding that really enables the genocide of our people in Gaza, right? And what's really important for SALAM to do is to visibilize it on an international scale, right? So we are trying to come up with a campaign, with a politics that can really encompass the international force of imperialism and logistics, right? And what we really launched last year was this campaign called TaTa Bye Bye, right? Which is sort of flippant, but really it's about this Indian behemoth called TaTA. And this Indian behemoth really enables us to see not only how this entity is complicit in the oppression in India, but also how it's ballooned into an international force which sees itself in providing weapons and providing cloud infrastructure to the Zionist entity, right? All organized through New York City. And so it's really important to see some of these connections, right? And I really want to get into the India-Israel ties, right? And what we really see is that India and Israel, India is the first non-Arab country to recognize the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people in 1974, right? And 6 years later, it votes for the UN resolution recognizing Zionism as a form of racism. But India is really sanctimoniously embracing a policy of non-alignment for decades. But the selective gesture of solidarity with colonized peoples do not erase the foundational role of settler colonialism in Indian statehood. The question of Kashmir, right? And this question of Kashmir is really the contradiction at the heart of Indian liberalism and Indian statehood that enables the collaboration we see with the Zionist entity today, right? The Indian occupation of Kashmir makes it a longtime peer of Israel, an entity with whom it has always shared political goals and military tactics. As the global economy expands in the 1980s and pressure built among Indian elites to privatize and deregulate the economy, India looks to Israel as a conduit through which it can build closer ties with the United States. And so as it's liberalized its economy over the last 3 decades, ramped up its violent wars against resistance groups in Kashmir and in central and northeast India, India has established a powerful tripartite relationship with Israel and the US in defense, in intelligence, and in business. Right. Sorry, you guys can't really see that. Go to the slide. The really important thing to know is that India is the largest purchaser of Israeli arms. India is the largest purchaser. Israeli defense exports to India are estimated to be worth 1.5 to 2 billion per year. India has imported military hardware worth 2.9 billion from Israel, and it accounts for 37% of Israel's total arms imports. Right? This is massive. And India's own defense export increased 12% in 2024 and 2025. Right? And what I want to really get into is sort of like there is so much in common ideologically that we can see that we can really dig out and mine from logistics, right? Go to the next slide. And just next slide. And what we really focused on was sort of like how do we pick a company, pick a facilitator of genocide that both visibilizes the connections between India and Israel as ethno-nationalist collaborationist states, but also that has a direct impact in the US as a facilitating ground for this genocide, right? So I want to get into TaTa, okay? So TaTa is an Indian conglomerate, a behemoth synonymous with Indian capitalism itself. It stands out as a prime example of private capitalist complicity in genocide. And TaTa will be stopped, must be stopped, and we will do it together. The capitalist class, it defends its violent interests by creating and maintaining a monopoly over war making. And Indian capitalists that include Adani, Reliance, Wipro, Infosys, Mahindra are no exception, right? So we'll see. I mean, Laleh talks about this, but Israel is one of Israel's largest ports is actually operated by Adani, who is a multi-billionaire in India, and he, you know, and they bought this port and managed this port. It extends beyond arms, right? The port is crucial to the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Links key regions from India to Europe via the Arabian Peninsula. Adani also controls the Mundra port. It's the largest in India and Gujarat. And so this arrangement, right, this India-Israel arrangement has actually acted as an alternative route to circumvent this Red Sea blockade imposed by the Yemen's Ansarullah forces. Goods can be shipped from Mundra to the UAE and then transported over land to Israel. So interrupting this collaboration, interrupting this logistics supply chain is actually key to interrupting the genocide, right? And getting really into TaTa is that they are a very easy entity to target, right? They are complicit. They produce the components of Israel's genocidal infrastructure, weapons, banking services, computing infrastructure, and they also supply armored vehicles to patrols to stolen Palestinian land. They have joined forces with the extreme right-wing government of Narendra Modi, and they have embedded themselves with the government Make in India agenda. They're also liars. They cultivate this false image of benevolent industrialism. And most importantly, they're everywhere. They're in New York City. 101 Park Avenue, right next to Bryant Park, and Cornell's Roosevelt Island campus. Most importantly, they are the primary sponsor of the New York City Marathon. So I want to abstract this a little bit, right? When we think about the New York City Marathon, when we think about how the New York City Marathon really chokes all the arteries in the city, right? It's an interruption into the daily life of the city. TCS, TaTa, gets basically a free sponsorship and gets to launder its image through the New York City Marathon. It's in our streets. It's in our neighborhoods. While it is supplying armored vehicles, weapons, cloud infrastructure to the Zionist entity. They must be stopped. They will be stopped, and we will do it together. And this is some of that, you know, and if you really go into sort of what Laleh says, how much time do I have? All right. So, I mean, Khalili, she really talks about the interplay, and I'm quoting her here, the ephemerality of the sea and water and the historical, political, and socioeconomic mechanisms that congeal them into more durable forms, right? So I want us to think about this water. I want us to think about something abstract and how it's being congealed into something more permanent, right? But our discussion of how other infrastructural systems and networks, such as the physical cables of telegraph communication or the global forces of speculation, also illustrate this kind of harnessing, right? And we can see that with how TCS actually provides cloud infrastructure for the Zionist entity, Project Nimbus, right? And really, if we sort of like unveil what Laleh calls the evanescent paths of maritime trade, right? Route making and establishment of ports. It's a really messy process. What we can see is that like this mystification is actually not so mystical at all, right? You can actually see that the science at the heart of financial route making is about these affective attachments, these political landscapes, the financial interests of the participants, as it is supposedly about these objective market forces, right? So this interruption is very, very possible. And yeah, I mean, you can see that TaTA has been operating in the US since 1868. There are 12 TaTA subsidiaries in the US. It is the largest TaTA subsidiary in the US. It is the largest sponsor of H-1B visas. The largest sponsor, right? And what we see is that more than 50% of its revenue comes from its US operations. It is really, really concerned about not just its operations here, but also its image. Right? What is it actually doing here? And there's a reason it goes by TCS, not TaTA, right? Like to hide itself. Next slide. And yeah, I mean, this is the map. I mean, they got, I'm sorry you guys can't see this, but they got grocery stores, fucking offices, random stuff, right? They have Air TaTA, right? There's a material connection here in our neighborhoods. And I want to really get into New York City Marathon. I mean, New York City Marathon, I mean, if you guys have ever been, if you guys run it, it's a really beautiful day. I mean, you know, like no fucking cars, just like you're freely running in the streets. But it's also a day when TCS gets to launder its reputation, right? And for like a really paltry amount, we don't have a number on here, but it's really like $5 million. $5 million, right? To launder its reputation as this bloodthirsty corporation and get its image, get its sort of like sponsorship on the apps, on images, on like just like streets, right? Yeah, the bibs. I mean, you guys are probably seeing TCS New York City Marathon, right? It gets to do that for like $5 million, right? And so we are calling on New York Roadrunners, which is the organizer of the marathon, to actually drop TCS as a partner. Or you can go next slide. We can go next slide. And so our overall vision here, by targeting TaTA, by targeting TCS, by demanding that the New York City Marathon drop TCS as a sponsor, is to strategically weaken India-Israel ties. And this is our immediate goal, right? New York City Marathon, drop TCS, cut all ties to the Zionist entity. Our broader goal is TaTA, which is the entire entity, and I'm sorry I didn't get into sort of like really what it does. It actually does the parent company, TaTA Advanced Systems Limited, actually partners the Israeli aerospace industry, specializes in missile systems, radars, electronic warfare. Gila Systems is a subsidiary of IAI, offers maintenance and technical solutions for defense and electronics in India. So I mean, this collaboration really, really is a close collaboration. But we are really focused on SALAM being a New York City organization, right? And sometimes these collaborations, these sort of like logistics can seem either opaque or so massive, but they're actually right fucking here. They're right here. They are in our neighborhoods. They are tangible. They are in buildings. They are people that live close to us, right? So that can be interrupted. Next slide. Yeah, and we've done a lot of different stuff, right? And really, it's about like interrupting the marathon. We're trying to organize with workers at New York Roadrunners. We're trying to organize also with workers at Cornell Tech, which is where TaTA has a huge presence. That's on Roosevelt Island. We can skip this, but TaTA has a far-reaching influence within higher education. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration in CUNY, and we can get into that later on. We can go. Keep going. I mean, I included this as just like a brainstorming strategy. We can keep going.
We can do it as
Please join. We need your help. Right? This cannot be accomplished without the support of our neighbors, without the support of our community, right? So if you just go to the next slide, I think it has our website. Keep going. One more.
What was it?
Yeah. So right here, go to indiaisrael.org, read up on the connection between India and Israel, read up on TaTA. Fill out our form. We have a join forum on indiaisrael.org. You can also go to droptcs.com. It's on indiaisrael.org to see what the campaign is working on. And by the way, I will just say, related to PYM, we were really inspired, and we take leadership from the Mask Off Maersk campaign. We take leadership from BNY Funds Genocide. We take leadership from City's campaign against it. Like these are entities and people we are in conversation with. And if honestly, if you look at droptcs.com, like we are kind of using the exact same Squarespace blocks that Mask Off Maersk did, right? So like it really is like we are trying to answer the call for BDS. We are trying to answer the call of the resistance. We are going to interrupt the flow of logistics. We're going to interrupt this genocide. We will stop them. We must stop them when we can. I'm going to end this with a chant, if that's okay.
Please.
From Palestine to Kashmir.
Palestine to Kashmir.
Palestine to Kashmir.
Palestine to Kashmir.
Stop the U.S. war machine.
Stop the U.S. war machine.
From Kashmir to Palestine.
Kashmir to Palestine.
Stop the U.S. war machine.
Stop the U.S. war machine.
Thank you so much, guys.
That was fantastic. What does TaTa not do?
I don't know.
They don't require. They're also a weapons manufacturing.
Yes. So what the entity we're targeting is not a weapons manufacturer, but their parent company, yes. They have an aerospace division.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's too much. Would love to see our comrades from port workers and communities for Palestine.
Great. All right, hi comrades. We are Port Workers and Communities for Palestine. So that's Port Workers, the number 4, Palestine on Instagram yet again. We were founded in October 2023. And for those unfamiliar, we target Zim, also known as Zim Integrated Shipping Services Limited, the largest and oldest Israeli shipping company. Zim is the 10th largest shipping company and it thus constitutes a significant part of the Zionist economy. It is directly responsible for the extermination campaign in Palestine by not only shipping arms and other goods, while Gaza continues to be showered with drones and forcibly starved, but it played a major role in laying the foundation for the settler colonial project by exporting the very same settlers themselves and serving as the only maritime connection for the so-called state. If there was ever any confusion about the role of Zim, look no further than its name. Zim was founded in 1945 as the Zim Palestine Navigation Company Limited, which later changed to Zim Israel Navigation Company. And among one of its earliest ships include SS Theodor Herzl. Yes, that Herzl, the founder of Zionism. To this day, they fly the flag based upon his design. Shame.
Shame.
So we come with this context, and we come from the Block the Vote campaign in Oakland, whereby community organizations like the AROC, Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and organized labor unions such as the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU, Local 10 workers, successfully prevented Zim from ever unloading shipments in the port of Oakland, creating the longest blockade. In doing so, they not only put economic but political pressure, they echoed the calls from the Palestine Federation of Trade Unions to boycott the occupation and to cut all ties, including unloading Israeli ships and cargo. We brought Block the Boat Coalition here to New York, New Jersey before in 2021, and to try and stop Zim. And back then, we were met with a lot of repression. So after over a decade of organizing with the Block the Boat campaign, we then assessed the material conditions here in New York, New Jersey in 2023 for our Don't Move Zim campaign. We understood the Port of Oakland looks very different than that of the Port of Elizabeth. Whereas the West Coast had the backing of its own labor movement, the communities which were very immigrant heavy and Black and brown led, we were confronted with the locales of the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, which we will dive deeper into later, but essentially leaned more right-wing and more fascist. And because of this difficult nature, we decided there was no more movement to be had without the labor, so we focused on the outreach and a gradual escalation. Next slide, please. Given that we understand the necessity of our long-term organizing, we pivoted our focus on both that sustained action and relationship building with the community at large and with the port workers and the truckers. For the community, this looks like hosting teach-ins like today, phone talks, making sure you phone bank this Tuesday, May 27th, tickets, and more. So with the workers, we identify leadership, we conduct outreach and raise awareness about Palestine. As we witness the ongoing blockade of aid in Palestine with little to negligible aid entering, we know that truckers are also being attacked, and an issue that impacts our own truckers very deeply who are not unfamiliar with the unsafe working conditions. I want to also shout out the truckers movement for justice who are working to improve those conditions and who are essential for our campaign. And finally, beyond directly impacting Zim's business, our work targets the logistics of the supply chain by pressuring secondary targets such as freight forwarders or trucking companies, which we will explore later. Next slide, please.
Which side are you on?
Oh, I don't know, it's mixed up.
Little mixed up.
All right,
Yeah,
go back,
further
go
back.
back.
It's with the outreach. Yeah, this is the other way. We're going backwards.
Okay. Coalition partner.
No.
Oh.
Other way.
This is the other way.
No. No. This is
Back to the beginning.
Back to the beginning.
the beginning.
This is the,
Back. Keep going. Yes, this one right here.
oh,
This
okay.
is the next one. Yeah, this is where we were, where we just
Oh,
went to so the next slide after that. Okay. So, thank you for the slide there. Right. Here we have the port of New York, New Jersey, which spans the entire New York harbor and includes ports on Brooklyn, Staten Island, and New Jersey. So you may be wondering why the emphasis on the Port of Elizabeth. It's where the largest terminals on the East Coast are, and where port workers have alerted us about the war material coming out of the port into the hands of the Israeli military of defense, and they've also alerted us about the goods that are of ancillary use to the genocide. So that's food for the Israeli military contractors or components for their surveillance technology. In other words, Zim is shamelessly shipping produce from Europe to Egypt while Gaza is being forcibly starved. So we just want to emphasize yet again that as we collectively call for a people's arms embargo, every Zim shipment, no matter the content, helps keep up the so-called Israeli economy afloat. So from forcing the so-called state to cut spending and prop up the bank and damage the country's ratings, we will make sure that genocide is costly for all war criminals. Next slide. So as we delved earlier on into the history of Zim, Zim's current CEO, Eli Glickman, is a former Israeli naval commando. After October 7th, he pledged the company's ships and infrastructure would support the entire war effort. Shame. Next slide, please. And so since the 1970s, global shipping has been containerized. This means that the vast majority of goods now travel in standardized containers and can be easily transferred between trucks, chassis, train cars, and container ships. So a container ship basically arrives at the port, owned by the government. It's the wrong slide. Owned by the government or a public-private entity. So in this case, the New York and New Jersey Port Authority, leased and operated by different corporations like Zim at the Maher terminal. And these workers at the port include the crew of the dock ships, the longshoremen who unload and load the ships, unload and load the ships, the port truckers who haul the containers in and out, and the clerical workers for the shipping companies and customs. Our strategy is to build with all of those workers. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. The ILA in New York, New Jersey represents 5,000 workers in 8 locales. It is rumored to have ties to the mob, and for years we were under different kinds of state and federal monitoring. So the locals are highly segregated, with the best jobs reserved for the white workers. And the 2 main locales at Maher, covering about 1,600 workers, are of Locale 1233, which is mostly Black, and Locale 1235, which is mostly Portuguese American. The ILA is thus a very conservative and nationalist union, which tends not to take positions on social issues, besides pledging support for the U.S. military in times of war. So while we've had the cold shoulder from the Locale 1235, we've also had sympathy, but little to no commitment from Local 1233's end. Next slide, please. So now there are about 9,000 truckers working at the port, and most truckers are mislabeled as independent contractors. They've had to cover the cost of their trucks. Some are indebted. Unless they're W-2 employees, they're not safeguarded by labor laws. They can't unionize and they get paid by the load. And so much like our Uber drivers, there are owner operators that own or lease their vehicles and bear the cost of their upkeep. So since the deregulation from the 80s, a huge portion of the trucking industry consists of small trucking companies, each with a handful of vehicles driven by these owner operators. And this goes for port truckers who each carry containers to and from the ports, as well as the long haul truckers who travel great distances between the warehouses. So we have found that many Arab, Muslim, and Sikh truckers are sympathetic towards Palestine. And in Chicago in December 2023, Palestinian truckers even organized their own caravan against the genocide. And the relatively few trucker organizations that exist, such as the Truckers Movement for Justice, are led by a few strong personalities providing mutual aid support and mobilizing for occasional protests. Because drivers are free to accept or decline the containers offered to them by trucking company bosses, they are well positioned to refuse to move Zim containers, as we will see soon. I will pass it now to my colleague.
We're gonna shift, can you go back to the olive oil?
Always?
Next one.
It's the other
Sorry, I slide there a little. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the workers involved in the Zim shipments. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about more details about how these Zim shipments move, particularly through New Jersey, and where our current focus of strategy is. So right now, we're focusing our strategy on Always Freight Forwarding, which is a freight forwarding company that frequently contracts with Zim. Freight forwarders, if some of you might not know what this is, they're middlemen that coordinate getting the containers from point A to point B. So getting them from a location in New Jersey to the port, for example. They contract with shipping companies on one side and with trucking companies on the other side. So right now, we've been doing regular in-person pickets outside of Always, which has its office in Elizabeth, New Jersey. One of its main offices is there. And this is a picture, I don't know if you can see all of it, but there's a picture of our pickets out there that we do as often as we can. And we also do phone zaps often, which we're gonna plug our next one soon, to pressure the company as well to drop Zim as a customer. They also have offices in the West Coast and around the world, which makes them a good target for a broader national or international campaign. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so to drop Zim, as we've talked about, we need to bring together port workers with partners in New York and New Jersey. And in particular, we're very motivated by bringing together movement between New York and New Jersey in particular, and building our energy around that. So we've been trying to do a lot of sort of like flyering and talking to people who are living in New Jersey and around the port and around the Always offices to talk about how to get involved with our campaign. So recently we flyered a mosque in New Jersey, and with a high concentration of Palestinians who are living there, especially we've been really trying to focus on engaging with our masajid in the area to get people involved in our pickets and things like that. And we're hoping that through our engagement with community institutions local to the area of where the port is and where Always is, we can get we can get connected with more port workers and truckers who might be interested. And some of the other ways we've been trying to reach port workers and port truckers is actually by doing outreach at diners and other locations where many of them go before or after work. And we've been having a lot of conversations over a pretty sustained period of time now. As we said, we started this campaign in October 2023 when the current ongoing genocide began. So we also have a Facebook group now with port workers and port truckers in there that have often shared with us information about things that are being shipped from the port, and we share a lot of info there and are trying to organize there. But I will emphasize that this is the place in which some of our biggest challenges lie in organizing to stop Zim, particularly organizing workers around this issue. As Oliver talked about, many are non-unionized, especially port truckers. So we're really facing an uphill battle here, but we're in it for the long run. So inshallah, we're gonna be successful. We can keep this up there for a second. Yeah, so just a little bit more that we do. So as we mentioned, we do the pickets. We do the phone zaps, which we're going to talk about, and those pickets we do in Elizabeth, New Jersey, at the Always office, and we do carpools there. So if you want to come through with us, you're more than welcome, and please come and talk to us to get involved. We also do, on top of our outreach at some of these like locations like diners and gas stations, we also do flyers on the street, like literally on the days where they are moving the trucks and giving out our flyers to people and trying to give them to the port truckers as well. And then we have, as we said, we collect our contacts through WhatsApp and Facebook groups so that we can continue to engage with them. So some of the things that you can get involved in are to join our outreach that we do, to join our pickets, to attend teach-ins and stuff like that. So please join us. And then I'll move to the phone zap. Yes. So this is our next immediate action that every single one of you here can get involved with, which is that we're having our phone zap where we call always, like all day long on the days that they're shipping Zim containers to tell them that we are not okay with them shipping Zim and we want them to cut their contract with them. So you can see it on our Instagram, but hopefully you all can follow. But we have our phone zap on May 27th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we have all the instructions here about how to call them. They even have an Israeli desk. That's how much they're committed to working with the Zionist entity. Shame. Yeah, and then the last thing I'll do is the toolkit. Yes.
Oh yeah.
That's right here. Yeah, so we put together a toolkit to encourage more action around Zim all across the country and internationally, especially because Zim is operating in locations other than just New Jersey, as we talked about, right? So we're going to be sharing this toolkit. So if you know people who are in different parts of the country or internationally who you think might be wanting to learn about how to build their own campaign, please talk to us and we'll get it to you. But since all of you are based mostly here in New York and New Jersey, we want you to get involved with our campaign right here. So please come and talk to us about that. And I'll say just some wins that have been happening internationally around this that I think is important in keeping us motivated to keep, that we can win, is that Malaysia actually in December 2023, right? They cut all ties with Zim and said we will not ship Zim. And just on May 15th, on the anniversary of the 77th Nakba in Liverpool, they also did a disruption of the Zim offices there. So that's also another point. So yeah, I'll conclude there. I think that covers everything that we wanted to say. But please get involved, and we'll close this out with a chat as well. We were really inspired by your so we'll start there. Okay, so it's gonna go like this. Okay. Zim is a killer. Don't move Zim. Zim is a killer.
Don't move Zim. Zim is a killer. Don't move Zim. Zim is a killer. Don't move Zim. Zim is a killer. Don't move Zim.
Yeah, we'll do this other one too. Always forwarding, cut your ties. Always forwarding,
Cut your ties.
all Zim containers for genocide.
Those containers for genocide.
Always forwarding, cut your ties.
Always forwarding, cut your ties.
Zim containers for genocide.
Those containers for genocide.
Unfortunately, our comrade from LA could not zoom in, so I'm gonna keep this nice and short so that we could spend some time doing some discussion. NYCDSA also interested in doing some stuff with the logistics industry. This is a campaign that we are building, and it has not yet passed as a priority campaign. However, I would love for you all to know about it, because I'm very excited about it. It is the Break the Chains campaign. The chains here mean the chain of supply. You okay?
Just keep going.
Okay, good. All right. We're very much inspired by the anti-nuclear movement that was very effective in getting non-proliferation. And it's the thing that I'm most excited about is the different levels of action that are possible, right? As we've seen from the previous presenters, the ways we can cause, it's not a consumer industry, right? There isn't, I mean, there may be a TaTa store, but there isn't necessarily a Maersk store that you can throw a brick through, right? There isn't, I mean, there may be, but we'll get to that at some point. There isn't a boycott, really, that you could stop purchasing things because literally everything passes through these supply chains. The Maersk, for example, shipments had a lot of Christmas presents tied up in the same shipping containers as the weapons that were being moved. This is how interconnected commodities are with each other, right? And the Palestine Solidarity Movement has a couple of traditions and strategies that include boycott, divestment, and sanction, right? This is a civil society focused kind of movement where you're pressuring companies, you're pressuring legislators, you're pressuring states, you're pressuring institutions like universities to divest. And indeed, there are universities, there are pensions, there are things of this nature that you have control over, but not in sort of obvious ways, that are invested in the logistics industry, right? We are complicit in ways that we don't get to choose. There's also a labor component. As we saw with the previous presentation by our comrades, there are people who could choose not to do this work, right? Getting it to that point requires an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of relationship building, and an incredible amount of planning. Those are two separate components that are targeting a similar goal. The break the chains and arms embargo, or labor for an arms embargo, or rather, let me just back up for 1 second. We are NYC DSA. National DSA has recently passed a labor-focused campaign along the entirety of the logistics industry. This is a very, very ambitious and long-term plan, right? Training, placing people in strategic companies, strategic sectors, getting people comfortable with being able to know how to talk about Palestine, and slowly building over what may take a long time, right? Many, many years before we have the labor power, the worker power to interrupt these chains of supply chains. New York City is copying them, also with our own ideas, but like we're very much trying to emulate this kind of labor focus. We're also aware that there are other aspects that can be other levers that we can pull. The Mayor's office is in, as TaTa noted, is in New York City and in New Jersey. We know where they are. We know who the people who are putting pen to paper, signing these contracts that are leading to, I think we can just not stress too much about it. And I'll wrap it up.
Anymore.
I know, it's confusing.
There's 100 tabs.
Shut up. Yeah, and these sites of struggle, the streets, the ports, the legislative halls, are the universities. These are all pointing at 1, 2, 3, 4 companies that are all doing the same thing that we could all be participating in. And so what I think is exciting about what we're seeing in this room is the fact that there is this level of focus. That there is a level of focus on a sector in the economy that has so many different levels of entry and so many different levels of creativity possible. And DSA wants to see how many different ways there are to attack. So I'm just gonna leave it there. This was very ad hoc. Just wanted to plug that. I wanted to also, sorry, was that a raucous applause? Just kidding. Not done. I will plug a training for the Labor for Arms Embargo that's coming up soon. When I pull it up, you will leave knowing when it is. You won't find out right now. And then I would like us to spend some time. Okay, so here's the deal, you guys. I would much prefer discussing what we've spoken about today than watch the video that Laleh, even though it's fantastic and I've seen it. And I will send it to you. So everybody here, if I have your email addresses, I will make sure you have access to that video, and I highly recommend you watch it. It'll give you a lot of background. It'll also reduce information overload. And I think what we need is to just like think about what we've heard today and start scheming with each other and maybe have a little discussion as a group. Last thing I'll say is I'm seeing fuck Maersk stickers around. Who did that? That's crazy. Anyways. I'm trying to figure out who's been doing that.
Wait, where?
There's on like a street. So okay. Yes. I will pass it on to my dear comrade Ahmed.
Hey everyone, thank you for sitting through. I hope this was interesting. I hope we can have a discussion now.
Actually, do the panelists feel like they want to come up and just like sit? You guys should come up.
Yeah, so that's all of us. Thank you again, all of you, for the panel. I think it was extremely informative. So these are the logistics of empire. And they did not start this year. They did not start with this genocide. You can go back 100 years. Maersk, you will see Maersk's name. Maersk was employed by the US Navy for World War II. Maersk created like some shipping containers for Standard Oil of California, which became Chevron today, which we're also boycotting. You can see the complicity of empire in all its form, whether it was British or American. It has always done this. And this is no small task. Like nobody is saying disrupting Zim or TaTa or Maersk is going to be easy. This is one of the hardest things for us to do. We've seen the impasses. We've seen the limitations of our movement here. We've seen the rallies. We've done what we could, but we can still do more. This is going to be something that requires revolutionary patience, but always with revolutionary patience, we need revolutionary action. There is no script for this. We have to be creative and we need to be courageous when we take these actions. It's going to be scary up until the moment we do it. So we need everyone here, really. Nobody has the answers. We all together will come up with answers because we're doing our part, our duty in this fight against empire, against the genocide that's happening, against all of the wars that the US empire wages across the world. Arab life is not cheap. Arab blood is not cheap. It is worth something. Right now, there is Gaza is facing starvation. Lebanon is being bombed. It has not stopped. So we need to keep thinking, need to dig in deep. We need to get really creative because it is our duty here. We're inside the home of empire. We're inside the house. It is our job here. As they fight there, we fight here. There's multiple fronts. We have to keep fighting. So as we discuss, let's think as creatively as possible, as courageously as possible. What can we do? Because it's going to take a lot of work. We're going to need a lot of people. This is the pillar of American empire. logistics is the pillar that like transports all of this stuff all over the world. So we're gonna have to be really, really creative to chip away at this over many years, many decades. We're gonna have to organize the unions, we have to build up the culture of boycott. We're gonna have to think creatively. So as we start, inviting questions for all the panelists about TaTa, about Maersk, about Zim, about the port workers, the ILA. How do we start? Where do we start? There's any questions? Hands up. We can get you the mic, inshallah. That's a very courageous one.
Yeah, I can just. Thank you, everyone. I was curious, in regards to TaTa / TCS, I was curious for some more details about how the New York Roadrunners campaign is going, if it is involving a lot of people who are working there or are members. I just wanted to know kind of more details.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Awesome.
Audrey. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so we're really trying to build with runners.
Okay.
We are really trying to build with runner organizers to sort of understand running, understand the marathon as a critical node in this partnership, right? As a critical node in the whitewashing of TCS and TaTa's relationship, right? So we've sent like, I think 4,000 emails and letters to New York Roadrunners office demanding that they drop TCS as their sponsor. We are organizing some phone actions. Last year, we got like, I think 500 runners to take our bids at the marathon that just say drop TCS below the official bid. We're aiming for even more this year. Also, last year's marathon, we had like 3 sites along the route where we have like, rallies and protests. We also, runners, it's a very interesting demographic to organize. We are organizing the DSA running club, for example. We do Palestine solidarity runners, Bronx Runners for Palestine. But I think some of the problems we run into is really the sort of like safety that comes with being a runner, and how do you interrupt that safety? And so that's what we also want to organize with New York Roadrunners workers, right? Last year, we were able to put out an op-ed by an anonymous group of New York Roadrunners workers detailing not only just the labor abuses that happen at New York Roadrunners as an entity, but also the call to drop TCS. So we were connecting those two objects there. But we really need, if you're a labor organizer, if you are a runner, if you have experience organizing charities that are at this marathon, please talk to us. Please fill out a form, please talk to me, go to India's.org, get in touch.
I'm going to take the facilitator privilege to ask a question. As you see, like the TaTa, the different fronts in the fight. How do you see the role of the streets in the labor movement? How, if we're not union organizers, if we are not able to, to do the kind of deep organizing that, obviously all organizing is deep organizing, but what role does the street have in the labor movement when it comes to Palestine? And that's for anybody who feels inspired. What role does the street have in the labor empowerment?
Street movement. I can offer something. Labor workers, what do you call union workers are people too. They have lives, they're part of the community. They don't, people radicalize, people get inspired to take action in small rooms like this, having discussions with their neighbors, with their family members. It doesn't always have to happen in a labor setting. We work across all sectors of society, whether you're at your home agitating against the landlord, or you're at work
or you're in a coffee shop talking to someone, or you're in a room like this. So the streets, it's really about opening up the political imaginations of labor work. They're not separate. They're all kind of part of the cumulative. That's how I see it. But if there's anyone else who wants to take the mic away from me.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with that, because we've done like one tabling so far for Maersk through the Break the Chain campaign, and I found that there were a decent amount of people that were, had been in union their entire life, or were part of one already, that we were just speaking with on the street too. I think there's more of a crossover than maybe we think. Maybe not everybody's a support worker, but they might have, in terms of larger cultural influence, things incredibly important and part of the educational piece to get people in all different movements aware of what's happening.
No, I completely agree. I think we have to understand what loyalty to the streets really means. The subject, like Rapper argues, when you have, as you were saying, Ahmed, like the port workers are an extension of the community itself. So although we name it port workers and communities for Palestine, we must see ourselves as part of that community. And as it relates to the tabling or the teach-ins, it's also understanding what the material conditions are of the truckers, of the port workers themselves, to be able to get to a point where they feel privy to then be able to disrupt the war machine itself and end the conflict that they may have. Because we're learning, even in the cycle of dependency, even as they're named these independent contractors, we see that they're really not. So what does it take to then get those workers to then be able to cut ties, whether it's with the trucking companies themselves or whether it's with the freight forwarders?
Sorry. Just really quickly.
One thing that's really important to point out about the streets is that these companies, for example, TCS and TaTa, are on the streets. They have their symbols on the streets. They have their symbols on people's jackets, right? They are organizing on the streets, whether we know it, whether we understand it as that or not, right? So our job is also to interrupt it and offer not just an alternative, but opposition. That these are our fucking streets. And you can't provide Zionist entity weapons and be on our streets. That's a very, very explicit opposition that we must offer.
Can I also add something?
Please.
I feel like, through the work that we've been doing in Elizabeth, I think that the idea of an opposition between streets and labor like really misses the component of organizing, which I think is lacking in the movement, which is longer term, really slow building. There's this idea that it's either like there's neither one of these poles is moving, and we're not going to be able just realistically to move quickly enough. But you can't sort of make all these assumptions about the composition of workers, and you can't also make assumptions that certain spectacular actions will move people. Clearly they're not. And so, and like who the people are around, let's say in New Jersey, it's not the same thing as in, let's say, the city where you're having like a big protest. You're trying to figure out who are the local mosques, like who are the local, where are the restaurants that people hang out in. It's very, very different terrain. And that requires really sustained presence that I don't think is like, it doesn't really fit into either of those ideas of what the model is in that opposition. And so it requires a lot of investigation, I think, and like actual figuring, like not assuming that we know who is there or how to talk to them. And I think that what we're trying to do is to get out of this impasse of either a kind of street-based, like militant tactic, which is sort of ephemeral, or a strictly labor thing, which is also not reaches its certain limits. And we also don't have the people in those labor unions anyway, right? So this is, I just would like for us to resist that binary of those being the options.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna just speak on behalf of the DSA. That's a really, really, really important contribution and critique of the movement because as a leader or as a leader, in the like trying to mobilize for this for street actions has been really difficult. People have gotten really tired, and I think finding some like breaking that impasse. I think a big part of it is sort of being open um to new kinds of organizing. And that's something I'm really excited to see what you guys are doing because it's not something that I typically see as this kind of long-term community building with a single goal and a single target. So thank you for that. I see a couple hands. Gonna go for you and then you and well yeah, I think we'll start there.
I just had a question about TaTa. Like, could you elaborate on its what the role is of TaTa in the military occupation in Kashmir, and what role, if any, does it play in the subjugation and genocide of the people of Sri Lanka?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not aware of anything that has to do with Ilam and the Tamil people away from the sort of mainland India. But we can definitely look into that. That's a very interesting direction. Related to Kashmir, it's those vehicles, armored vehicles that TaTA builds and sends to not only Zim and TaTa, but also to patrol Adivasi land in central India and also to patrol Kashmir. Right, so that's a very direct connection. But also in sort of ethno-nationalist project, right? There's this Made in India sort of like ethno-nationalist framework the Modi government is operating off of, and TaTA is directly complicit in that and sort of like settler colonization of Kashmir. How do you actually like normalize it? Yeah, that would be.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to uplift and highlight the importance of movement not really taking hold like large revolutionary movements without having the community behind you. So I would suggest for all of us to kind of refocus some of our energies towards community building and community engagement, whether that means if your organization or your AG is geographically based, or like if you have a specific target, just kind of like more than tabling, also more than just showing up and being like, here are some flyers, like actually being involved in the community, building those relationships. And then your words will mean more if you have those relationships built. When you do a teach-in, people will actually show up from the neighborhood and they'll listen to you in earnest ear versus just like showing up one day just doing a table. So it takes a little bit of work, but it's worth it.
Okay. Yeah, I think doing investigation. We have to investigate. I think we have time for a question, and then Ahmed, do you want to pick the next questioner, and then we'll do like a quick laugh.
I saw you earlier. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate that that was just shared on my mind too. I think another thing on my mind when it comes to the more like quote unquote militant actions is that at least in my life, I feel like a lot of the burnout I'm seeing from people isn't so much that they're tired of showing up, it's that they're tired of seeing the options they have to show up for. Where everything against us is escalating, but the tactics we tend to take aren't. And obviously that really begins to open the conversation of major risk, whether it's economic, financial, or even to your family, losing your job, whatever, going to jail, at least for, like 12 hours, whatever it is for civil disobedience here. But I'm not sure that's a conversation that's like safe to be had in detail in this room. Just I don't know what the offset feelings are. I don't know if the panel, but yeah, like any discussion or thought around that, like if there was a way to do research, like what a meaningful form of escalation would be to gather around that, because I think people have their ideas, but it's hard to come together as a group. If that makes any sense, that's just been on my mind a lot, and I keep hearing it when I try to bring people to a lot of the less risky actions that are out there.
Should we collect one last question and then we'll answer them both and then wrap? Sure.
Well, it's.
Oh, yeah. Khalil, and then I'll hand it over to, our host.
Okay, this is probably absolutely definitely alluded to across the presentations, but like, what are like the prospects of like salting, like in like these like logistics, like workplaces or whatever, like getting jobs and what does that look like? And if they're pretty low, it's really hard, then like, what are other ways that folks like really thinking of like keeping that kind of engagement?
Sure. I also first, before I answer this question, I wanted to echo what my comrade had said earlier about like making sure we're not fixated on this like us-them dichotomy, because so often we see that within the movement, as we've seen within the student intifada, we've seen like people labeled as like outside agitators, and I think that's something that's very important, is that they are a part of an extension of that community, and this movement will fail if it continues to be in isolation of that. And so similarly, with regards to your question as it relates to like court workers and communities, again, it's having that, it's assessing not only their material conditions to get them to a point where they're able to then feel privy to do the things to cut the ties, but also getting the community to also be involved to then, without, in Oakland, it wouldn't have been possible without the support of AROC, of other community-led organizations. And similarly here in New York and New Jersey and in the port, it looks like, again, looking at the logistics, and there are certain places where we haven't even considered, for example, like the rail lines. And so as we continue to identify which trucking companies there are, which freight forwarders there are, we also have to identify now do a mapping of what those local institutions may look like the Masajid. Until we continue to popularize this movement in language, it will essentially be ineffective, because we have to continue to move the masses at the end of the day. And so this has to be something that is well known.
Anybody have anything before I wrap? Okay, friends.
Can I answer that question? It's very hard to get a job in the ILA. Even the communists in the 70s who were entering the ILW, they couldn't get in the ILA then. It's even harder now.
To wrap, I want to thank our panelists who were amazing. To answer the comrade's question about tactics and strategies, and Khalil's question about getting a job. I need one. Talk to each other. I think like the feeling I got from this panel is that there are paths forward. There are paths forward that lead us somewhere, that lead us to victory. But we need to be talking to the people who are going to do it, and no one else is going to do it, you guys. You are the ones, like, we are the ones who have to do it. So talk to each other, stay connected, and get contact info with the organizers, definitely. And I know that I'm going to be blowing up some group chats later. Excuse my, I'm very annoying. And Ahmed looks like you have something.
I mean, just to kind of put a bow on it, in America, particularly, one of the most glaring things you see is the social fabric, the community fabric is completely shredded. There is no, like, people don't know their neighbors, they don't know their coworkers, they don't know anyone in their neighborhood. And those connections are what apply pressure on people in those communities not to do bad things, to like resist, to act courageously. So part of the work here is building up that. Right? Be nice to everyone in your neighborhood. Be nice to your neighbors. Talk to them. Some of them might be port workers. You know, eventually they'll be like, you know what? The things they say might not be as bad as I think they are saying them. You know, they'll have a face to it. So that's how we build up the community. We're really trying to build up. We're not just solving this issue. The logistics part is one small part. Like part of our work is like changing the system as a whole, and that requires a lot more work, much deeper work.